going on an adventure. So there's only one way to figure it all out. Unzip the archaeology. Make it naked.
This is an ant hill. Ants are what we call social insects. They live in communities.
War and the Middle East. The two seem almost synonymous. Endless are the tales of Christians, Jews, and Muslims battling it out over what looks to many like nothing more than a strip of dry sand. But long before all that, there was a war like no other. Some 2,700 years ago, the greatest army in the world, the Assyrian army, marched out of what is today Iraq and made it to Jerusalem. On its way, it devastated everyone and everything in its path. Jerusalem was a relatively tiny city that now found itself surrounded by the greatest army in the world. And then, according to the Bible, something incredible happened, something miraculous. 185,000 Assyrians died mysteriously, suddenly. An angel of the Lord had killed them. That's what the Bible has to say. But what does archaeology have to say about it? Most people don't walk around thinking about the Assyrians. I mean, I don't know, maybe you're different. Maybe you, do you ever think about the Assyrians?
Not really.
No, not really, right?
No.
No. But something that happened with the Assyrians totally affects your life. And let me explain. They had Jerusalem surrounded.
Yes.
Then the Bible says there was a miracle.
Yes.
The next morning, people wake up, there's nobody there. They left, they ran away. You want to know how that affects your life?
Yes.
Had they won, had they defeated Jerusalem, do you realize what would have happened? There would have been no Judaism, no Christianity, no Islam. The whole world would be different. We wouldn't be sitting around here celebrating Hanukkah and Christmas.
Yes.
We'd be, I don't know, doing some Assyrian pagan thing. So what happened? In order to unravel this mystery, my journey begins in Israel, home of the only archaeology that can shed light on what actually occurred. Finding ancient archaeology is easy compared to making it through the traffic and into the old city. It's try to get to it. That's the trick. And make it there and back. After a miraculous parking job, I meet with Dr. Gabi Barkai, an expert on the Assyrian siege of Jerusalem. Okay, I'm just trying to understand what's going on here. Assyria is the big power of the time.
Correct.
The Assyrians are running out, pillaging and burning cities all around the country. And meanwhile, they're trying to get Jerusalem to surrender. Yes?
It is true. 46 cities of Judah were destroyed according to Sennacherib.
Sennacherib, why couldn't they get simpler names, these guys? Why did they have to get such complicated
Because they
names?
were Assyrians.
So they have
Assyrian names. In any case, the Assyrians arrived to Jerusalem.
So they show up here?
They show up here, and they built up their camp in order to besiege the city of Jerusalem. And the city of Jerusalem is awaiting serious trouble.
Many ants may be killed. It is a fight to the finish when two opposing soldiers meet. Hard jaw against jaw with no quarter asked, and none given.
The Assyrians were led by their sadistic king, Sennacherib. Today, there are two artifacts that confirm the Assyrian campaign against Judah. The first is a relief carved in stone depicting Sennacherib's siege and destruction of Lachish. Interestingly, tyrant Sennacherib's head is missing from most of the murals that survive today. The second significant artifact is Sennacherib's prism, an inscription on a triangular tablet which describes in Sennacherib's own words how he treated his enemies.
I cut off their lives like one cuts trim. My prancing steeds, harnessed for riding, plunged into the streams of their blood, as if into a river. Their testicles I cut off and tore out their penises like the seeds of cucumbers in June.
I feel a strange sense of victory eating a falafel with cucumbers. Do you know that Sennacherib said that he's going to cut up his enemies like cucumbers?
That's what he said.
Yeah.
A cucumber.
Cool as a cucumber. It never occurred to me until this moment.
Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, was also the self-proclaimed king of the universe. And like many men looking to take over the world, his grand vision became a bit short-sighted.
I'm Sennacherib, king, the man, the Assyrian. I'm king of the world.
The men will cheer, the boys will shout, the ladies, they will all turn out, and we'll all feel gay when Johnny comes marching home.
But if Sennacherib's army was that powerful, what exactly stopped him from destroying Jerusalem?
I can thread a needle. I can go with this truck through a space that's half as wide as the truck.
As it turns out, Jerusalem wasn't as weak as the history books might suggest. For a tiny kingdom, it did a pretty good job of resisting Sennacherib's attack. Carl Ehrlich is an archaeologist and historian. I managed to get his take on the story.
So Sennacherib comes in, he decimates everything in his path.
He's a killing machine.
He's a killing. The Assyrian Empire is a killing machine. It's one of the ghastliest war machines of the ancient world. That being said, the stiff-necked people, these Judeans, did offer resistance.
The Judeans were led by King Hezekiah, who after consulting the prophet Isaiah, decided to stand up to the Assyrians. Although he wasn't much of a military man, Hezekiah is now ranked with David and Solomon as one of the greatest kings to have ever ruled Jerusalem.
Hezekiah got prepared. Jerusalem was well fortified, well reinforced for withstanding a long siege.
This is crazy. If you're an Assyrian, say this little people with this little city, suddenly they think they can take on the whole empire. This is nuts, right?
I wouldn't say that.
If you're an Assyrian, I'm saying. They're surrounding Jerusalem.
Yep.
It doesn't look good.
Does not look good at all.
The Bible says something miraculous happened.
Some supernatural, extraordinary event that took place in Jerusalem while the Assyrians were besieging Jerusalem. Now, what was it? What was it?
This is what the Bible says. And the angel of the Lord went out and put to death 185,000 men in the Assyrian camp. When the people got up the next morning, there were dead bodies everywhere. So Sennacherib, king of Assyria, broke camp and withdrew. He returned to Nineveh and stayed there.
The Bible mentions even a number. 185,000 people were found killed there.
Lord's angel comes at night and smites 185,000 Assyrians.
Yeah, I think the number is over-exaggerated.
You think it's only 183,000?
I don't know. I wasn't there, but the number does not convince one to be a historical figure.
What would you think it is?
I don't know. So the story about the Lord's angel, it is for those who would believe the miraculous nature. And,
you'd think it's a heavenly intervention too. If some guys if some guys had your house surrounded, and they were about to get you, and suddenly they had, stomach cramps, you'd think, and they ran away on their motorcycles.
I witnessed the 6 Days War in Jerusalem here, and I believe in miracles. I believe in heavenly intervention, and it's okay with me.
Make yourself invisible.
Oh, I almost forgot.
In our modern world, the miracle theory has lost its power. For most scholars, the angel of God has been replaced by a number of other theories that often fail to explain what happened to that many soldiers.
We have an extra-biblical source, Herodotus, a Greek historian who tells us that on the way of the Assyrian army from Egypt, he says, the army was attacked by desert mice.
Herodotus says an army of mice defeated the Assyrians?
Yeah. Who ate up all the military equipment and the leather components of the military equipment and neutralized the Assyrian army.
It's like the Nutcracker suite.
Yeah.
Another theory asserts that a plague broke out and ravaged the Assyrian army.
But the enemy in this case is not big soldiers. This invading army is so tiny that it can be seen only through a microscope. Its soldiers are the germs of communicable disease.
But the idea that an army of mice, or even a plague, killed 185,000 Assyrian soldiers doesn't wash with Henry Aubin, a Montreal newspaper reporter. I met with him in Toronto to talk about his controversial book, The Rescue of Jerusalem.
We know that the epidemic theory is nonsense. We know there's...
Why do we know that?
Because, A, why wouldn't the Hebrews have been afflicted by this, as well as the Assyrians? B, we know that the Bible says that God did intervene by way of epidemic in other situations. For example, the most famous one is Passover. Why would the Bible not say that disease was the cause in 701 at Jerusalem?
While trying to find adventure stories to read to his adopted African son, Aubin became discouraged by the lack of black heroes in popular history.
There were no comparable books on African historical heroes. So my wife suggested, why don't you look on books for adults on African history and try to draw from those books some bedtime stories.
He eventually came across the 25th dynasty of pharaohs, when a Nubian Kushite prince, an African prince named Taharka, ruled ancient Egypt. It's here that Aubin stumbled across what he thinks is the only plausible explanation for what really happened at the gates of Jerusalem. Montreal reporter Henry Aubin has uncovered strong evidence that an African Cushite army intervened in the siege of 701 BC, scaring off the Assyrians and saving Jerusalem from destruction. He tells me that the strongest support for his theory comes from the Bible.
The Bible is probably the best source. It's the deliverance of Jerusalem is described in 3 different books: 2nd Chronicles, 2nd Kings, and the book of Isaiah. 2 of those 3 accounts describe the advance of the Cushites trying to liberate Jerusalem from the siege, and then the Cushites vanish from the scene, and it's an angel of the Lord who slays exactly 185,000.
But Aubin's Cushite theory is new and controversial.
The Bible is not meant to be history, it's a theological representation of historical events, and it is meant to show us the power of the Almighty within the history of the Israelites.
Aubin believes that to account for the glory of God's miraculous intervention, 26 chapters of theological text were at some point inserted into the Bible. By simply removing these later additions, the Kushite intervention becomes clear.
So if you take out these 26 verses, what you have is Taharka is advancing. Next verse, Sennacherib, the Assyrian emperor, says, let's withdraw on the double. If you ignore the theological insertion, then you have the Cushites, cause and effect. Assyrians hear the report of Taharka's advancing army. Next sentence, they leave.
They left, they ran away. Why did they do it? Good question. One theory is, by a Canadian guy, is that an African army was coming to the rescue of Jerusalem.
Yes.
And this black African army rescued Jerusalem just by starting to march. The Assyrians got scared, ran away, and, you know, Jerusalem and the entire Western civilization was saved by this one African prince.
Yes.
Interesting?
Very interesting. Yes.
What do you think of Henry Aubin's theory?
I think he ultimately comes to the conclusion that it was the Kushite intervention in and of itself that saved Jerusalem.
The Hebrews were not passive recipients of this help from the Cushites. The Hebrews did some heroism themselves. They held out. They knew the Cushites were coming because they were allies, and they held out against this siege for as long as they could. And they also helped themselves by digging this very ambitious waterworks to carry water under the city of Jerusalem, Hezekiahs Tunnel.
Get ready for the Jubilee, hurrah, hurrah.
The remains of Hezekiahs Tunnel are located in the West Bank in a fairly bad neighborhood, but we brought along our own security, so hopefully there won't be any problems.
Can I make it in there? So you'll see it's a miracle because the car is bigger than the space. Okay, now let's see how badly I scratched the car. Yeah, you're okay.
It's here, at the Gihon Spring, just outside the city walls, that Jerusalem located its only source of water. When King Hezekiah found out that the Assyrians were advancing, he had to act fast. So he completed a tunnel, 1,750 meters long, that gave the people of Jerusalem secret access to the water.
Water outside of the city of Jerusalem had to be brought into the city of Jerusalem. So while the Assyrians were dying of thirst up above, the city of Jerusalem had all the water it needed. How did he do it? They coordinated teams of engineers, some digging from the outside, some digging from the inside, and they did what often people digging tunnels today can't do, and that is they met somewhere in the middle. So basically, you read in the Bible something, and you come over here, you dig, and there's actual archaeological corroboration of the biblical story.
This is one of the best examples for that. You have the story here becoming alive, emerging out of the rocks of Jerusalem. This place, the Spring of Gihon, is a key point to understanding the political and military problems of King Hezekiah. Just think about the king standing here thinking to himself how the Assyrians would divert the water or poison the water, and how the people inside the city of Jerusalem during the siege would die of thirst.
I think the Assyrians are coming again. No, it's the Israelite army. It's okay, we're safe. What's going on is we're stuck in a very bad area of the West Bank here, and our security guys have locked us out of the car.
Hezekiah's Tunnel is real archaeological evidence of the siege of Jerusalem. But it still doesn't explain what happened to 185,000 Assyrian soldiers. If the Cushites did have something to do with Jerusalem's rescue, why does all the popular scholarship ignore them? Why don't the history books even mention the possibility of this African intervention? Henry Aubin thinks the reason the Cushite army has been excluded from popular biblical scholarship has less to do with history and more to do with prejudice.
Why are the Cushites expunged from this account? The reason would have been when the chosen people are divinely rescued, it really has to be by the divinity, by Yahweh himself. So Yahweh intervenes directly. It can't be through a human agent. That would be the primary reason.
So you're saying the Cushites rescued Jerusalem, but the Bible says God did it?
Yes.
Aubin thinks that the reason scholars haven't gone with the Kushite intervention theory stems from racism and its effect on biblical academia ever since European colonialism reached its height in the 18th century.
Society today has this view of Africa as being incapable of pulling off any such feat. Assyria had such a huge army. I mean, it was seen as invincible at that time. How could an African army repel such a force? It boggles the mind. We think of Africa as grass huts and drums. We don't see it for what it was.
Aubin says the bias against Africans is a relatively recent development in biblical scholarship. At the time that the Bible was written, this racism didn't exist. In fact, the Cushites were highly regarded and mentioned quite often in the Bible in a very positive light.
During the flight from Egypt to the Promised Land, Moses marries a Cushite woman. In Isaiah chapter 18, verse 7, you have the Cushites being capable of coming to Jerusalem to worship Yahweh, worshiping God, the God of the Hebrews.
The Cushites are actually the most praised of all foreign peoples mentioned in the Bible.
He makes a strong case that the idea that at a time when really the Assyrians were crushing everybody right, left, and center, a Hebrew-African alliance seems to thwart the greatest military might, that there's good reason why in a very biased atmosphere of a couple of centuries of biased scholarship, that would be ignored.
I think he does a great job there in showing that scholarship is not as unbiased as all that, and that it's quite possible that the Cushites and a Cushite advance played an important role. But I don't think that even with his arguments, that is the sole factor. Do we know how successful they were? Do we know what the extent of their intervention here was? Are we able to claim unequivocally that there were Cushite armies that moved into the region? No, we aren't. We're here in the realm of speculation. It's quite possible, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the way it was.
Couldn't it be a combination? Here they are, they're having a tough go of the siege. A plague breaks out. And then Sennacherib wakes up in the morning, and not only does he have a shortage of water, tough Judeans that are totally religiously crazy and think God is going to save them, and he's got a plague in his camp on top of it, and then he gets word that these Nubians are marching towards him. Couldn't it be a combination of exactly what the Bible says?
Look, in every matchmaking, in every marriage, and in every divorce, there is not one reason which brings that couple together, and not one single reason which causes them to get apart. In life, it is usually a combination of reasons.
So what happened? Well, on one level, we know what happened. Jerusalem was saved. And because Jerusalem was saved, so was Judaism. And that allowed for Christianity to be born and Islam to be born. So what saved Jerusalem? Well, maybe it was a plague. Maybe it was an army of rats. Maybe it was the threat of the incoming Cushites that made the Assyrians run away. But whatever happened, the ancients wouldn't have differentiated and wouldn't have cared. They would have seen it as a miracle.
I'm going on an adventure. So there's only one way to figure it all out. Unzip the archaeology. Make it.
Crawl in and the worms crawl out. Your brains come tumbling down your snout. Be merry, my friends, be merry.
Herod the Great casts one of the darkest shadows of the Christian Bible. He was the king of Judea, and he tried to kill the infant Jesus. According to the Gospel of Matthew, it was he who ordered the slaughter of the innocents, the attempt to kill Jesus by killing all the babies in Bethlehem. And then, 2 years later, nearing the age of 70, death caught up with him. But even if you believe in divine retribution, Herod's end was particularly nasty. His people couldn't wait to be rid of him. But even more impatient were the worms. While the king watched, they wriggled out of his genitalia. The Bible paints Herod the Great as the great villain. History indicts him for countless murders and political assassinations. As villains go, his worm-ridden death was deliciously disgusting. But for over 2,000 years, the actual disease that dethroned Herod has remained a mystery. What killed Herod? The answer to that mystery might hold the key to explaining part of the savagery of Herod the Great. After all, worms in your willy might put you in a bad mood as well. Will you think I'm a wimp if I close my eyes? Okay, I'm not looking, I'm not looking. Okay, not looking. Something, okay, maybe we could switch this one. Dr. Jan Hirschman from the University of Washington, School of Medicine in Seattle, has studied the descriptions of Herod's final days as written by first-century historian Josephus. Hirschman is trying to diagnose Herod 2,000 years after his death.
He said it was itching all over his body. He said that he had breathlessness that was particularly worse when he lay down, also associated with a racking cough and a foul breath. So I'll just change it to the next one.
To learn more about our patient, I traveled to Caesarea, an old port city built by Herod. At the time of Jesus, it was one of the greatest ports in the world. To this day, people come from all around to tour the site. Before he was Herod the Great villain, he was Herod the Great builder. In fact, one of the greatest builders the ancient world ever saw.
Okay, y'all. Welcome to Caesarea, ancient Caesarea, the planned city built by none other than... Who was it built by? Herod. Herod the Great.
We can run this little tour together.
Okay, Herod the Great, who built lots of things all over Israel, including the expanded, beautified Second Temple, right? So he built Caesarea, named it after Augustus Caesar, right? His mentor.
I just want to know, why are you calling him great? He killed his wife, he killed his kids. He killed you. Why are you calling him great? Why don't you call him crazy?
You're right. He was crazy. He was paranoid. Like you said, he killed his best friend Hippocus. He killed his brother Fatsael. He killed his favorite wife Miriam. He killed Miriam's 2 sons who were in line for the throne. He killed countless high priests and all kinds of people, anybody he thought betrayed him.
But he was basically a nice guy?
No, he was basically a paranoid, crazy guy. But the thing that was great about him is he was a great builder. And he built lots of beautiful buildings, cities all over the country. So that's the reason I called him great.
He may have had his mind set on building his way into history, but most of us know only his history of trying to kill the infant Jesus.
Rise, take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt, and remain there till I tell you. For Herod is about to search for the child, to destroy him.
But what can we really say about this story? Dr. Peter Richardson, professor of religion at the University of Toronto, is a Herod expert. He literally wrote the book on Herod. He's not a cross-dresser, he just likes dressing up like Herod. As for me, well, when in Rome.
The one thing that Christians think they know about Herod the Great is in that episode that is always told at Christmas time. And he's killing all the children under 2 years of age in Bethlehem because somebody's told him that a future Messiah, a future king, was born in Bethlehem. So by getting rid of all the children, he gets rid of a rival somewhere down the road. That story is told to us in only one text, the Gospel of Matthew. I think it is an exaggeration of his execution of 2 of his own children in the very same year.
Dr. Isaiah Gaffney of the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, expert on first-century Jerusalem. What do you think? I mean, did he kill all the babies and all this kind of stuff?
You can't disprove it, you can't prove it, right? clearly he did put to death those people who would have been perceived by him as being a challenge to his total rule over the country. Whether that means that he killed the innocents or the babies or what have you, there's no way of proving.
The biblical Herod was an old man, already diseased and dying. But what was he like as a young man? In order to reach a diagnosis, Dr. Hirschman had to construct a lifelong medical record for Herod.
Young Herod, from a physical point of view, was very robust. He was a warrior, he was an athlete. He seemed to have a very good health. There was some chest wound, which apparently was a minor one, and no other mention of any illness until his mid-40s, when he had some vaguely described problem in which he had inflammation and pain at the back of his head, accompanied by some mental confusion. It seemed as though it was going to be a fatal illness, but he recovered, and after that, again, no mention of any problems physically until just at the time of shortly before his death.
Herod must have been healthy and strong for most of his life, because he survived assassination attempts, poison plots, even a shipwreck. You'd think that after all that, a king could at least come home, put on slippers, and relax on his throne.
Take it easy, dear. Relax.
Oh, these little women have a way, but maybe
Nope.
I forgot to
His domestic life alone would have done many a man in. The poor guy had to juggle 10 wives, eunuchs, spies, poison plots. The king's life was so complicated, you'd never keep track of it all. Unless you're Canadian Grandmaster of all things Herodian.
Quick, Ron.
Yes.
I need info on Herod.
Then Herod hears the rumor that 3 of his eunuchs have taken bribes from his son Alexander to usurp his throne. Herod gets suspicion, sends out spies. Soon everybody's denouncing everybody else. It doesn't matter if you're guilty. It doesn't matter if you're innocent. Everybody gets tortured equally. The Romans are marching around with armies all over the place. Antony and Cleopatra are doing their thing in Egypt. Julius Caesar is doing his thing. There's Pompey running around. Wait a minute, Pompey's already dead.
Okay, now that that's all clear, look, don't try to keep it straight. The point is to get a glimpse of the pressure surrounding Herod. Our best clues to Herod's state of mind come from the archaeology. Some people say manic building has Freudian undertones, psyche carved into stone. What do Herod's buildings tell us about the pressures he faced, caught between his Roman neighbors and his Jewish subjects? This is a 1:50 scale model of Jerusalem at the time of Jesus and Herod the Great. Even the Romans recognized that Herod had built Jerusalem into one of the most beautiful cities of the ancient world.
The Romans talk about Jerusalem as being the most famous city of all of the East and not only of Judea. Beginning with Herod's time, Jerusalem was a beautiful city and certainly well known to the Romans of the day. Herod built a Roman theater in Jerusalem, and this is one of many elements that really changed the nature of the city. It became much more of a Hellenistic Roman city, even though the Temple Mount clearly stressed the Jewish aspect of the city. And so what you have here really is a hybrid. On the one hand, he is a Jew, and there's no question about his legitimate claim to being a Jew. But on the other hand, he's very Hellenized. He's really part of the Greek and Roman world. The palace with 2 wings to it over here, one named after the Roman emperor, the other after the commander of the Roman armies.
He was naming the palace after the Roman emperor?
After Augustus, the Roman Caesar.
He was sucking up to them.
Well, you might call it that. He was on very good relationship.
Is that true? Is that historically true?
Yes. He had a very good relationship, a very good working relationship with the Roman emperors. And they got what they wanted out of Herod, which is basically law and order, maybe in reverse sequence. In other words, they needed really order more than anything else. Herod could supply that.
Roman lackey or a master of realpolitik? Either way, Herod's political success gave him the stability to pursue his passion for building.
I would say if you were writing an architectural history of the 1st century BC, Herod would be right at the top of the list in terms of his creativeness, his innovation, his brilliance.
Brilliant in life, brilliant in death, as I'm about to uncover at the Herod family tomb. Herod had such a reputation for being a fantastic builder that when anything from the 1st century that's beautiful is found, everybody says it must be Herod. And when this tomb was found in the late 1800s, it was so beautiful that everybody suddenly said it must be the Herod family tomb. You can see embedded in the rock here a rolling stone, as described in the Gospels from the 1st century, which would block the way to this amazing tomb with this giant courtyard over here. So, we don't know. Maybe it is the Herod family tomb, maybe it isn't. What we do know is if he liked you, he treated you good even after death. If he didn't like you, or if you really got him angry, he made sure that death came sooner rather than later. And that's what happened with his beloved wife. He killed her. And that's what happened with 3 of his sons. He killed them too.
There's a well-known story that Herod at one time killed his sons, whom he suspected of plotting against him, to which the Roman Emperor Augustus said, better to be the pig of Herod than the son of Herod. This, by the way, is a play on Greek words. The word for pig in Greek is hios, and for son is hios. In other words, better to be his hios than his hios. And so a Jew would never slaughter a pig for obvious reasons, but he might slaughter his sons. In this case, Herod slaughtering his son.
Did you come to any conclusions about whether Herod was nasty to begin with, or whether he was actually a normal guy until his scrotum started falling off?
He seemed to be more cruel and more paranoid than he had been throughout his life at the time of his illness. I think sometimes the suffering that they have undergo during their illness does create problems in the way in which they manage to deal with other people.
Nearing 70 years of age, Herod was struck down by an illness that racked his body with pain and a fierce itching. If he wasn't mad before, this would have done the trick. Josephus records that worms were living in his privates. This would have been the result of advanced gangrene in his privates.
What, do you want to see a picture of the gangrene?
You have a picture of the gangrene, do you? We're talking about penis gangrene here. Ooh, I didn't quite. All
right.
Gangrene in his willy wasn't the only time a member caused Herod trouble. Family members weren't just family. Marriages were political alliances. Home life was a grand political game, a game that had rules particular to Judea.
When members of the Herodian family have to marry, let's say daughters, have to marry foreign princes, those foreign princes are forced to circumcise themselves. And if they don't, the marriage is canceled.
Did they have to convert to Judaism?
Well, you know, it's a sort of conversion. In other words, it would be unthinkable for a daughter of the Herodian court to marry a prince who was not circumcised. And he required this. So this is the Jewish side to Herod.
He had a Jewish side?
Yes.
At the wedding, did he force them to eat gefilte fish?
I was not there.
It's possible.
Yes. Can I go home?
You want to go? You don't like this line of thinking? Wait, we need to get...
Fretting over family foreskin wasn't his only pressure. Trouble with his neighbors cost a few sleepless nights as well. His Roman neighbors included Brutus, Augustus, Mark Antony, and to the south, his sworn enemy, Cleopatra. Dr. Gabby Barkay is a Jerusalem archaeologist familiar with the web of plot and intrigue spun around Herod by Cleopatra.
She hated the guts of Herod, and after every night of a love affair with her favorite Roman rulers, she got as a present.
She was hot, right? Cleopatra was very hot, according to history, right?
Yeah, I prefer Liz Taylor. In any case...
and after every night with her Roman lovers?
She got the income of the plantations of Jericho. Herod was afraid that all his kingdom will be given as a love present to this lady.
Herod outlived Cleopatra. His building continued. But this manic building wasn't just Freudian overcompensation. As we're about to find out, it wasn't just a case of my column is bigger than yours. So, was Herod's manic building Freudian overcompensation? Just a case of my column is bigger than yours? According to Professor Richardson,
I think he was really trying to stimulate the economy. So I think he was trying to do great public works in order to keep everybody employed, in order to keep money flowing, in order to move the economy ahead.
He's a pretty smart cookie. I mean, he's playing political role, he's sucking trade to that area, he's getting everybody building and working.
People have been prevented from seeing some of those other dimensions to his time as king.
Because of his dementia?
Because of the horrible reputation that he had.
So in order to get a holistic view of Herod, we've taken a bit of a look at his family tree, his political world, all important aspects to understanding the mind and mental state of our patient. Now, to get back to the purely physical symptoms, abdominal pains, shortness of breath, and itching. How does Dr. Hirschman determine which is the most important symptom?
There aren't many generalized illnesses that cause itching, and so my assumption was that itching was an important part of the entire illness. Unlike abdominal pain or shortness of breath, for which there are dozens and dozens of possibilities.
The itching may be the most important symptom from a medical point of view, but let's be honest. We really want to know where the worms in the willy came from. Well, this is Hirschman's theory. Itching led to scratching. That introduced bacteria, and that infection led to gangrene, a prime breeding ground for maggots.
I can kind of, yeah, what's that?
Those little white portions are the actual maggots themselves.
They're flies, basically, we're talking about, right?
They're flies.
Baby flies. I just want to understand this straight. You're saying that Herod would have got gangrene in his penis, and then as the tissue died, flies were laying their eggs in his penis.
In the dead area of the skin, dead tissue.
It seems like, you know, divine retribution here. I mean, major, big time.
Now, it's not enough to know how Herod behaved. We need to know the context of how other people got along in Herod's days. After all, we judge our health in comparison to others.
Now, if you would see Herod in the context of history, if you would look at the court of his friend Augustus in Rome, Augustus' mother, Livia, actually killed everybody who would have been a threat or even possibly getting to a position that would make him or her dangerous politically. So she would kill everybody surrounding her.
So compared to Livia, you're saying Herod's a good guy?
These political murders were part of the spirit of the period.
But the Christian Bible, it says he's cruel.
Yep.
The rabbinic literature says he's cruel.
But don't
Josephus Flavius says he's
forget
cruel.
that the rabbis admitted that they said that he who didn't see Herod's building didn't see a magnificent building in his lifetime.
Yeah,
and
I mean,
also,
does that get you off the hook? You build nice buildings, you can kill your kids?
Look, he was a king of the 1st century BC, and we ought not to forget that. You cannot judge a king of 1st century BC with the standards of the 20th or the 21st century AD. That would be impossible.
Over the centuries, many believed God judged Herod, and the worms were divine retribution. What we do know is that his illness became so bad, he took desperate measures to escape it.
He was given a knife to pare an apple, which he did frequently, and he tried to stab himself, but he was prevented from killing himself by one of his attendants and was therefore lived a little bit longer.
His subjects couldn't wait for his death, but what they didn't know was that after his death, things would fall apart. Within 60 years, the country disintegrated into civil war. The Romans burned Jerusalem. Herod's reign marked the height of fabled Jerusalem's beauty and fame. But what killed Herod?
Final diagnosis would be that he had chronic kidney disease, and that seemed to be the single disease situation that explained all the other problems that he had. The shortness of breath, the abdominal pain, the itching, all of those could be explained by the chronic kidney disease.
Herod needed dialysis.
Yes, I think that's probably right.
Had he had a dialysis machine, he could have lived to kill again.
It's conceivable, or had a transplant, I suppose, although he's pretty old for that. He was 69 at the time of his death.
Following his death in Jericho, he was buried at Herodium, with a funeral ceremony, which was probably one of the most fancy funeral processions that this country ever saw.
If you were anybody who was anybody in the first century, you were there.
Soldiers, even from Britain, came to participate in the procession, which started in Jericho and ended up near Bethlehem in Herodium.
Did this bring you closer to Herod? Do you feel like his doctor now?
I feel a great deal of sympathy toward the suffering he endured at the end of his life. I think it's considered just some simple problem like itching, for which there wasn't any good treatment at the time. How terrible a suffering that would have been.
Did you wish you could kind of go back in time and give him some antibiotics?
I wish to go back in time and see him and see if my diagnosis was correct.
Can we say Herod's illness caused at least part of his savagery? I mean, chronic kidney disease is pretty nasty, but does it really explain evil? And anyway, for most of his life, Herod seems to have been a robust, healthy warrior, athlete. The archaeology reveals a great man. The written word tells the story of a monster. Who you want Herod to be really depends on whether you put more faith in the word or the stone.
The worms crawl in and the worms crawl out. Your eyes fall in and your teeth fall out. Your brains come tumbling down your snout. Be merry, my friends, be merry.